Thank you, and it's good to be here today. I was scheduled to speak for half an hour. I'm going to talk fast and get through a little more quickly and get you out of the ring. It's very nice to see so many veterans here. Thank you for raising your hands and identify your service. Today is not our day. Our day comes in November. Veterans Day celebrates all Veterans Day. On Memorial Day, we don't celebrate. We remember. We remember those who are no longer with us. Those who have passed, as well as those of you who have served, are my heroes. You are a hero. Now that's a word that makes some people uncomfortable. Call a Vietnam veteran a hero, and he'll be inclined to say, no, not me. All the heroes are on the wall. As if our heroes are all dead. That is not true. I've had the privilege of meeting nearly every one of America's living Medal of Honor recipients. They are heroes, every one. And so are you who have served. And so are you who may not have served in the military. I saw a police officer here earlier. He's a hero to me. Those of you who are parents are heroes. I'm a Vietnam veteran, and I have many heroes myself. I'm an old NCO, and I was glad to see some other NCOs here. I'm not a big fan of officers, in particular, second lieutenant. When my son-in-law was pinned in Alabama, I told him, I said, when that gold bar turns silver, we'll talk again. But I walked softly about giving officers a bad time because, you see, I owe my life to a young second lieutenant in Vietnam. I extended my tour in Vietnam. I came home for a 30-day leave. I flew back to Da Nang, and from Da Nang I had to catch a C-130 flight up to my fire base outside of Quang Tri. It was a cargo plane, and on that day there were 3 passengers. Myself, an Army chaplain, and a young second lieutenant. As the C-130 took off out of Da Nang, some of you Vietnam veterans will remember, they went out very steep and very quickly. And as we did, I could hear the ping, ping, ping of enemy rounds striking the metal fuselage of our aircraft. Didn't bother me, I'd been shot at before. We gained some altitude, and then the C-130 began to vibrate. And the crew chief came back, and he looked at the 3 of us, and he said, this is a cargo run. We're not used to carrying passengers. The pilot has informed me that we have taken some critical hits to the aircraft, and it's not going to sustain flight. This aircraft is going down. He looked at the 3 of us, and he said, now I have some very bad news. Because we're not used to carrying passengers, we have only 2 parachutes. Second lieutenant stood up. He said, I'm a leader of men. The Army has invested thousands of dollars into training me. I'm going to find my platoon, and I'm critical to their success, leading them into combat and bringing them home. Therefore, my life is critical. He reached underneath the seat, pulled out a pack, strapped it on his shoulders, and out the door he went. The chaplain turned to me and he said, Sergeant, I'm a man of the cloth. I've made my peace with God. I've lived a long life. You go ahead and take the other parachute. At which point I turned to the chaplain and said, Father, we're both going to be okay. You see, the second lieutenant just jumped out of the airplane wearing my backpack. You might say he jumped to a conclusion. As an historian, one of the most frequently asked questions I receive is what constitutes a hero? And over my years of research, I think I have finally come to a definition quite different from what most people believe. Mention the word hero, and most people think of courage, doing something brave. I'm here today to tell you, doing something brave does not make you a hero. you have any airborne people here?
Oh!
Jumping out of a perfectly good airplane takes a lot of courage.
They're not good airplanes.
But it doesn't. So courage is not the thing that defines what a hero is. In 2005, I was speaking at Fort Carson for a unit that had just come back from Iraq. And as I stood to talk to those young soldiers, I said, "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your service. You are my heroes." And I saw some of them shift in their seats uncomfortably because it is uncomfortable when someone calls you a hero. After I finished my presentation, the colonel came up to thank me for my speech, to coin me, and then he turned to the audience and he said, "Soldiers, Mr. Sterner is a true hero." And I blushed, and I shook, and I felt very uncomfortable. 15 minutes later, as I was driving home to Pueblo, Colorado, a thought occurred to me. "Doug, you're a damn hypocrite. Here you are going around calling all these people heroes and making them uncomfortable, and yet when somebody calls you a hero, you get all upset and try to shirk the title," because I had never considered myself a hero, and that was hypocrisy. But I didn't want to stop calling those soldiers heroes. I got home, and when I got into my bedroom office, I had a phone call from a reporter in San Diego. We had been working for some time on the upgrade of a Navy Cross that had been awarded to a young Marine by the name of Rafael Peralta. Fighting in Iraq, Rafael's platoon had gone into a house where they were confronted by enemy. As they worked their way through the house, he and two of his comrades began to enter a room. Sergeant Peralta was a young man who led by example. And as they entered the room, enemy gunfire broke out and struck Peralta. Then the enemy threw a grenade that would have killed all three men, save for the fact that Rafael Peralta threw his own body over that grenade to save them. For his actions, Rafael Peralta was awarded the Navy Cross. Many of us believed he should have been awarded the Medal of Honor. He was submitted for it, and it was going through a long process, and the reporter told me, "Doug, we just got the bad news today. There will be no Medal of Honor for Rafael Peralta." An Army pathologist has determined, and my first thought was, what in the hell is an Army physician doing messing around with Marine Corps awards? And I wouldn't blame any Marine for being upset at that. An Army pathologist has determined that the enemy gunfire killed Rafael Peralta. He could not have thrown himself on that grenade. It must have rolled underneath his body. And I was livid. And I thought for a minute. And I said to that reporter, Rafael Peralta did make a conscious decision to throw his body on that grenade to save his comrade. Maybe not in that moment, but long before that moment ever came. You see, no matter how well you train soldiers, you cannot train a soldier to throw himself on a grenade and sacrifice his life to save for his comrades. That doesn't come from training, that comes from here. At some point in his life, Rafael Peralta had determined, I am the least important person in my squad. My men are more important than me, and I will do anything, to and including sacrificing my own life to save them. So indeed, Rafael Peralta had consciously done, long before that moment, what he instinctively did in that room. There is a common statement that says, a veteran is that man or that woman who has written a blank check to the government of the United States, due and payable upon demand in any amount, up to and including their life. Too often we distinguish between combat heroes and era heroes, those who never got to serve in a war zone. I will not make that distinction, because we are all alike. We swear the same oath. We put on the same uniform. And we go where our branch of service sends us. It's not our decision whether we go to Iraq or go to Germany. And we do so with the knowledge that there is something, our country, our home, our comrades, our fellow soldiers, are more important than we are. And therefore, we are willing to give everything up to and including our life for their safety. That is why today I'm here to tell you, heroes are there to inspire us. Dead heroes serve to inspire and motivate the next generation to rise to the challenges and be heroes themselves. Ladies and gentlemen, we do not use the term hero too frequently, as I hear many people say. We do not use that term often enough. I love the child that says, my hero is my mom. My hero is my dad. Why? Because mom and dad have determined in their heart, my son, my daughter, is more important to me than my whole life. I am willing to give everything, to sacrifice for their better good. The Boy Scout that helps the little old lady across the street, if that's still a thing, I don't know, the Boy Scout, is that still a thing? Yeah. In that moment, he becomes a hero to that woman. And so today, I want to close by telling you a story, my favorite story of what a true hero is. He never charged a machine gun nest. He never threw grenades into an enemy bunker to destroy it. He was not a heroic corpsman that went to great lengths on the battlefield to save a life. He was a U.S. naval officer by the name of Richard Knott Antrim. 1942, Richard Knott Antrim was executive officer of an old four-stack destroyer, the USS Post. It was the last American vessel serving in the waters outside Java. And on January 28th, the USS Pope, with two British ships, attempted to get out of the harbor to escape the encroaching Japanese. They were met by the Japanese fleet and aircraft, and the two British ships were sank. The Pope was heavily damaged, but managed to duck into a rain squall in order to avoid the enemy. But the damage was too great. The next day, the Pope was sinking, and as the executive officer, Richard Knott Antrim organized the abandonment of the ship and got his men into lifeboats. The citation for his subsequent Navy Cross said that not a single life was lost. Every one of those 271 men survived in that lifeboat for 2 days until Japanese ships picked them up, took them as prisoners of war to a camp in Makassar, where they would be interred for the rest of the war. Now, Richard Knott Antrim was a pretty creative guy. About 1944, as American forces were coming back into the area, the Japanese had to improve their fortification. And they were using their prisoners of war as slave labor to build defensive trenches along the beach. Richard Knott Antrim went to the camp commandant and convinced the commandant that the plans for the trenches were really not quite effective as a defense. And he said, well, what would you suggest? Richard Knott answered and said, well, a series of curves. If you'll let me just go ahead and supervise this, we'll get your trenches dug, and the camp commander did so. Richard Antrim was subsequently, after the war, awarded a Bronze Star for the construction of those trenches. You see, the zigzag pattern in which he created those trenches from the air were seen as a giant U.S. to tell incoming American aircraft that were coming to bomb and strafe the Japanese that there were Americans there. His action saved many lives. Now maybe that makes him a hero. But what makes Richard Knott Antrim a hero to me is something that happened 2 years earlier. No one knows the date. It was somewhere around April of 1942. The Japanese had a code, the Code of the Warrior. They called it Bushido. Bushido said that it was just totally wrong to surrender and become a prisoner of war. If you became a prisoner of war, you had surrendered your dignity. You were no longer a warrior. You were no longer a man. You were a lower form of life than even an animal. And for that reason, they treated prisoners very inhumanely. 90% of the American prisoners of war in Europe during World War II came home alive. 1 out of every 3 American prisoners of war, the Japanese, died or was killed in captivity because they had that social mentality that debased their prisoners to be lower than animals. And therefore, it was as easy to kill an American prisoner, a British prisoner, an Australian prisoner, as it was to step on an ant. Beatings were common. The prisoners walked around the camp with their eyes down, never making eye contact with their captors, and required to bow to the Japanese. In that prison camp of some 3,000 Americans, Australians, and local people. That day in April, a young lieutenant was walking across the yard, and he failed to bow low enough to a Japanese guard. The Japanese guard went into a rage, struck him, knocked him to the ground, and began beating him. Richard Knott Antrim, realizing what was going on, felt he needed to do something. And walking to the middle of the yard, he began pleading with this guard to have more mercy, using pidgin English and sign language. He tried to explain, this lieutenant meant no disrespect. We're just not used to your customs. Please, do not do this. Now that alone was an uncommon action. The kind of thing that could quickly get another prisoner, Richard Knott Antrim, himself, beaten, tortured, or even killed. But his actions that day draw the attention of all the prisoners in the huts around the camp. And they all came out of their huts, standing in front, eyes down, fearing they were witnessing what was about to turn into the murder of 2 U.S. naval officers who were prisoners of war. In the guard towers, there was tension as they could see what was happening, and the guards stood ready with their machine guns. When the camp commandant walked out into the middle of the camp, and seeing this going on, he turned to the guard and asked him what was happening. And Richard Antrim again began to entreat with the camp commandant, an evil man who subsequently, after the war, was executed for war crimes. And Antrim pleaded with him, please have mercy. He meant no respect. He has had punishment enough. And deciding to make a case example, the camp commandant said, let's have court. We'll have a trial right now. And a table was brought out to the center of the prison compound. The camp commandant sat down, and on one side, the Japanese guard, announced the charges against this young lieutenant. And on the other side, Richard Knott Antrim tried to plead for mercy and the lieutenant's life. And when it was over, the camp commandant looked at the young lieutenant, battered, bloody, bruised, and said, "I find you guilty, and I sentence you to 50 lashes with a hawser." That's a very large rope. And then the guard took the rope, and he began to strike the lieutenant. One blow, another blow, another blow. Skin was broken, blood was pouring from this young lieutenant's body, and after about 5 blows, he fell to the ground in a crumpled, broken heap. And 2 other Japanese guards rushed in and began kicking at his prostrate body. The guard went to throw another lash at that prostrate body, and suddenly a voice shook the camp. As Richard Knott Antrim said, "That will be enough." A sense of shock went through the camp. No prisoner had ever dared to talk back or to defy the authority of their captain. The camp commandant looked up in total shock, and he said, "What did you say?" And Richard Knott Antrim's eyes met the camp commandant, and he said, "I said that will be enough." After a pause, he continued, "If there are to be 50 lashes, I will take the rest." From around the camp, among all of these battered, broken, and despairing prisoners, there went up a cheer. And this time it was the camp commandant who dropped his eyes to the ground. Some reports state that he even stood to his feet and saluted Richard Antrim before he turned and went back to his office. Richard Knott Antrim came home after the war, received his Navy Cross and his Bronze Star, and tried to get on with his life. But the stories of what he did that day in April 1942 circulated among the returning prisoners, reaching all the way to the White House. In 1947, Richard Knott Antrim was summoned to the White House, where President Harry Truman presented the Medal of Honor to him. And you can read his story in his Medal of Honor citation. Harry Truman had a custom. When he presented the Medal of Honor, he always did so with a statement, "I would rather have this medal than be President of the United States." He spoke those words to Richard Knott Antrim, and then he added a new line. As he looked at that heroic American naval officer who had risked his life and was willing to sacrifice for a comrade, he said simply, "You did a mighty fine thing." And that is my challenge to you today. Each one of us can be a hero to someone today, tomorrow, the next day, by realizing heroes are not all dead. We need those living heroes and examples, and you can be that example when you put others before yourself. Let us take that away with our thoughts today on this Memorial Day. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Doug. That was a very